Welcome to the Business Trendsetter Podcast, where we talk about trends and how to use them to grow your business. My name is Manny Turan.
And I'm Adam Hartung.
We're Spark Partners. We're here every week to discuss all things trends. We delve into business. We delve into lots of case studies, and whether it's big global companies or even ones that we interface with day to day. And today is a big day for Microsoft. They made some big announcements regarding their dividends and their share buybacks and a lot of other stuff that's in the news, and which are all important, by the way. And we use these major companies to really showcase how to identify trends and how you see these companies make moves on these trends. So while these two big things are in the news and they're great things for investors, there's kind of a hidden thing underneath which is potentially more powerful. And this aligns with one of the biggest trends that we talk about day in, day out, and that is, of course, AI. So with that, Adam, I'm going to kick it off to you to talk about why this third rail is so important besides the stock and the dividends.
Well, thanks, Manny. And you're right. Part of the problem that we run into, you and I, is people often read the headline in the news. And then they think, okay, that's what's important. And unfortunately, headlines are very, very short-term oriented. That's why they're headlines, right? In the old days, the headline was to get you to spend a nickel to buy the newspaper as you're walking down the street. So it had to be eye-catching. And it was what happened today and how could you be informed today? And every day you had to have a new headline. And so we kind of built a media system around that. When in truth, a lot of the most important stuff about companies aren't those headlines. I mean, the headline on Microsoft was raise the dividend 11% to 84 cents a share, and they're going to put $60 billion into a share repurchase program. And so immediately the stock traders, who are not long-term investors, they jump on that as, oh, this is great news. The share price should go up. And that may be all that people will hear about. And that's very unfortunate because there's actually a lot more going on at Microsoft. And digging in just a little bit can give you a lot more insight. And it can help you understand what they've been doing so that we can understand what we should be doing. And I'm being that very particular because my claim to fame for a long time was writing a column about the worst CEOs in America for Forbes. I was actually asked by the lead editors at Forbes to write this column. And when I did my research, I came back and said that by far and away, the absolute worst CEO in America was Steve Ballmer at Microsoft. Yeah. And he had some stiff competition. I mean, he was going up against the guys that run in General Electric and Sears, which both ended up in bankruptcy, right? I mean, basically, GE's gone, it didn't go bankrupt, but Sears is definitely gone too. And but the reason I picked Ballmer at the time was because he had this amazing business in Microsoft that he had done nothing with for 10 years. He had, he bought things like he bought Skype, and he bought the Ericsson phone company, and he had made a lot of investments, but all he could ever talk about was Windows and Office, Windows and Office, Windows and Office. And he was just wildly over-investing in the mothership, quote unquote. We'll get around to this a lot of the time. He just kept pouring billions and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars into Windows and Office. And then when they changed the CEO, the new guy, Nadella, he came in, and he wasn't new to Microsoft, but new to that role. The big thing he did is he changed the investment. And even though, yes, for 2 decades, the company and the product that had made Microsoft, which was Windows and Office, he stopped investing in those. He didn't stop entirely, but he cut it way, way back. And instead, he started putting the money into software as a service, cloud services, right? And he really poured heavily into that. But as time went along, it was software as a service, cloud. He did a lot of money there. Then he started investing also in other things. And that included gaming. And that's now included artificial intelligence. And so that's why this is such a great story, is in that I thought that Microsoft would probably fail. What I didn't anticipate was the board firing Ballmer and replacing him with somebody who would completely change the direction the ship was headed. Just completely look at the landscape on the outside of the world and say, outside of Microsoft, look at the world and say, hey, where should we be putting our money? And then de-invest in the mothership and put money into these other things.
Yeah,
and that's what's really the big deal.
I think that's a really good lesson in for all small business owners, medium-sized, for any business owner or executive. If you feel like you want to follow a trend And if you want to be on top of your game and be successful for the long term, you have to do more than just talk about it.
Yeah,
you've got to act, right? And we see this so many times where these leaders are there's the whole paralysis by analysis mentality. They don't act. They just talk about it. Oh, wouldn't it be nice if this, or oh, our customers are going away, our sales are down, and they just talk and talk and talk. And there's no commitment. There's no resource allocation. And we talk about this quite a bit, you and I, Adam. Is you got to spend the money where it matters the most.
So several episodes back, we talked about Microsoft making a commitment to put a microprocessor plant in southeast Wisconsin. There was a location that had been designated by Foxconn that was going to go build wonderful things. Wisconsin got all excited about it. It was the beginning of the Trump administration, and the thing just never materialized. It never really happened. It became a black eye for the politicians, and it became an embarrassment for the people of Wisconsin. But recently, this year, 2024, we talked about it. Microsoft stepped in and said, hey, we're going to put a microprocessor. We're going to build a chip plant there. And so what we've been seeing is Microsoft stepping out and making big statements. And we talked recently about Lumen Technologies, a company that had gone nowhere. It was a fiber optic cable company. Its share price had dropped from literally like $70 a share to $1 a share. It looked like nobody wanted it. It was on the buy list of every analyst out there. But then what happened was Microsoft hooked up with them and said, you know what, we're going to need to connect data centers with fiber optic cable and breathe new life into Lumen Technologies on the infrastructure side. And now that stock's up to $6 a share from $1 just a few weeks ago. So literally in July, based on that announcement. And then today, the announcement was that Microsoft is partnering with BlackRock, and they're creating a new entity that's going to invest in infrastructure. And this one's already, they're thinking all the way through, not just that I need chips and not just that I need fiber, but I'm going to need electricity. And I'm going to need water to cool my data centers, and I'm going to need all the other pieces of infrastructure, predominantly cool air, water, cool water, and then energy, mostly electricity we're talking about here. And then we're going to need that produced. We're not going to violate the regulations. We're going to have to actually probably get into making clean energy, like windmills and that kind of stuff. But that's not Microsoft's stock and trade, right? But they're saying, hey, we're going to need this. And so in that way, they've made this partnership with BlackRock. There's going to be $30 billion put up to build the infrastructure that is all they've defined it as today. But interestingly, let's get behind that story a little bit more. That $30 billion is going to become $100 billion. And the reason is that the general partner in this new entity is going to be called the Global AI Infrastructure Investment Partnership. Again, Global AI Infrastructure Investment Partnership. And the general partner, one of the general partners in this is MGX, which is the Abu Dhabi Investment Fund.
Yeah.
And so now what we're seeing is that we're going to have, this is $30 billion, as they are projecting, going to come at least $100 billion, which will include not just equity, but debt as well. And that $100 billion is going to go towards, again, everything from data center construction to fiber optic cable. And again, we announced that's not good for Corning, because Corning has dedicated something like 40% of its his glass production for fiber optic cabling is now dedicated to Lumen. And now we're going to get all the way back into the energy business. So you sit here and say, okay, we think of Microsoft, we tend to think of personal computers still in a big way. Some of us think of personal computers. Some of us think about cloud services, where they compete with Amazon Web Services. Younger people very likely think of gaming and gaming software and gaming consoles. So, but what we're seeing is they're now thinking about the fact that if we're going to be leaders, we're going to have to get really deep into thinking about how this is going to work, because it isn't going to do us any good to try to be a leader in artificial intelligence if there isn't enough electricity out there to cool the data centers to allow us to run the models so that we can deliver AI-assisted searches to your device, whether it's your phone or whatever device it is, or it could be the game that you're playing, the gaming device you're playing on, to give you the information that you need. So this is really thinking about, well, I think we're pushing our listeners here to think about, where are you making your investments? And a lot of people are just at the very top level. Where am I going to invest, right? They're only thinking one layer deep. Where do I put my time? Where do I put my most recent money? But what we see is when you get really successful, you're thinking about what's it going to take for this to work? And then I think also for our investors, to our listeners, would come around to this a little bit more, is what does it mean for opportunities for our listeners, right?
Yeah. I have a really interesting counterplay to that. Yeah. So this morning I'm part of a breakfast group, and we meet twice a month, every other week for breakfast. And this morning, the director of economic development for Pima County here in Tucson presented. And it was a very interesting conversation about where Pima County is investing and what they're able to provide new businesses coming into the area. And what I find super interesting is they can do a lot, right? They can help with zoning, they can help with tax abatement and all that. But the number one and number two things that they can help a company with is, number one, power. They work with the power company to make sure that your factory has the power it needs. Number two, workforce development. So in this sort of like the backdrop of what you're talking about, Adam, Microsoft making these investments and all that, if you look at the other side of where they're making the investments into the location, and you have a business idea or you're plugged into that framework, if you have an IT company or you have a manpower company that goes out and employs people as temp workers or whatever, you got to follow the money. You got to follow this money from where Microsoft is putting in the money, and then what's happening on the receiving end. In this case, you said Wisconsin, right?
Yeah.
And so what's happening there? What are the boots on the ground doing there?
Right.
And so you got to look at the whole landscape, and people ask, well, how do I know what trends are at play? How do I know how to take the power of trends and use them? Perfect example we're talking about right now.
I get asked a question a lot of times about why so many people move to Arizona. And I always tell them, I said, because that's where the action is, right? It's kind of like, yes, it's hot. It's very, very hot. And yes, global warming doesn't look like it's being kind to Phoenix. It's not nearly as bad in Tucson, or not nearly as bad in Flagstaff. So it's a big state. It's not just the city of Phoenix. But even with the global warming issues that are making it very, very hot in Phoenix, the reality is that they're finding the way to get people trained to do the job. And they're finding, the state of Arizona is finding, they're being smart about investing in training, and they're being smart in terms of thinking about how can we try to help people with these businesses. And like you said, plenty of energy. Can we get to plenty of energy at an affordable price? So I went back and I took a look just to update myself today on where the revenues for Microsoft are. And again, a lot of people look at Microsoft through the lens of one product. But today, the half of all of Microsoft's revenues, are in software as a service or cloud, what we think of as Azure.
Yeah, I can believe
that.
That
also does include new dynamic products that are part of Azure. Now, that's a fun word, dynamic. I found when I was doing my research, I had to really kind of work through the way people talked about the businesses, because what does it mean? The dynamic products of Azure are artificial intelligence products. There are things to help you make better decisions in terms of running servers, running your network, and running applications, often for larger companies. So that's about half the revenues, and it's growing at 30% per year. Yeah,
fascinating.
Good. So to top this off, Microsoft has had 28 consecutive quarters of revenue growth.
Wow.
28 consecutive quarters. That's 7 years. That's really good. Really good revenue growth. And their revenues have quadrupled or gone up by fourfold in that 7-year period, which is what we look for, right? We talk all the time about pay attention to growth, pay attention to the revenues. That's where you want to go. So here you have half your revenues in competition with AWS, or one of the two leading firms in the world, have been able to provide cloud services. So then we take a look, well, okay, what's the historical business? Well, that would have been Windows. Windows is about, it is less than 10% of the revenues of the company, and it's growing at 5% per year, right? And then you have Office 365. Now, I'm talking about those two differently because you and I, Manny, if we have a PC that's running Windows, we're an individual consumer, and that's called the Windows business. Yeah. If you're in a company, you're in Office 365. Now, I actually use Office 365 myself because even though I seem like a very small business, I have 3 computers that I use. Of course, I work with Mary Lou. She has 2 computers that she uses. She just got another one, so she's going to be using 3. There's you. I work with you, Manny. And then we have our subcontractors and our people that we work with out in the field. So I actually use Office 365. So I fit into that corporate mold more than I do the Windows mold. That business is growing about 10% per year. Okay, so that, again, is not a dead business, but it's barely making that hump. Remember, our baseline is always 10% per year. LinkedIn. LinkedIn is the one that you really got to sit back and say, wow, this LinkedIn still represents something like about 10% of the revenue of the company, between 8 and 10% of the revenue of the company. But the problem is it's only growing about 6% to 8% per year. They haven't really found a model there in social media that's anywhere close to being as powerful as TikTok, as powerful as Meta. Those are the ones really driving the marketplace today. And so that's something where you say, look, Microsoft either needs to get its act together, figure out what are we going to do to make that a more popular platform. I know that I was using it quite a bit. My use has reduced because they've throttled me back. I belong to 80 some groups. And of course, groups is where all the action is. If you're out there on LinkedIn, what are people saying in the groups? What new stuff is happening? How do you get connected? They throttled me back. They said that no matter what, I can only send out 25 messages to all of my groups. I can't even send one message to every group a week. I can only send out 25 messages a week. I can't even pay to send out more messages. I think there's a disconnect between why we use LinkedIn, which is to network, which is using messages, and why, the rules that they've come up with. So that's a problem. But the one that I found really exciting was gaming. Gaming is growing at 60% per quarter for the last 3 quarters. Literally 60% per quarter. Now, some people would say, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. Xbox is the third biggest platform out there, and I don't think I see Xbox growing. I said, that's right, but remember, they bought Activision. And what they did with buying Activision was they reinvigorated the business. It was only growing at 10, 14% per year, even though gaming was growing really fast. They were really quickly becoming irrelevant in the marketplace. But now they bought Activision. Now they're a much more relevant player in the business. They put in a new president. He's only a 41-year-old person. And by the way, she's a black woman. Is now the president of the gaming division. And so they're growing at 60% per year. So you can see where they're putting their money, buying Activision, putting money into that, putting money into software service cloud, and putting money into AI. Copilot, which is the search service, AI-powered search service, is already 12% of revenues of the company.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. So they're really going after that in a big way. And I think this is the story that people need to think about, because if we start thinking about where the future is, and what we keep saying, we've just hammered on gaming with people, right? Over and over and over. We've talked about the importance of gaming. Gaming is gamifying, as they use the term, is becoming more common in so many things that we do. I just, even on websites where I purchase things, increasingly there's gamification. We'll have a spin wheel, and it says, as I start the session, spin the wheel to see how much of a discount I might get in dollars or in percentages, or if there's a product to give away. I'm a cigar smoker. The site that I buy my cigars on, when I get my transaction done, it suddenly brings up a whack-a-mole game and lets me whack-a-mole into buying deeply discounted products if I would like at the end of it. So this gamification is very real. We know that when it comes to surveys, people are much more likely to complete a survey if there's a gaming element to it. And this is now Microsoft's making a big statement about its willingness to play in that part of the marketplace.
Yeah, you said a few minutes ago the idea of a headline, and then reading beyond the headline, and the whole idea of content marketing, and people that write copy to really engage people into funnels.
Yep,
a lot of it is just built on top of that sort of mindset, right? There's so much science that goes into the engagement of a customer and what it takes, the psychology of buying. You mentioned gamification. There is the idea of a subscription model. I mean, I buy stuff on Amazon. I buy protein powders and other things for my workout stuff. And there's a thing where, okay, you buy one, it's $35. But if you sign up to do the monthly thing, it's $28. So, it just makes a lot of sense. Hey, I'll just do the monthly thing. So there's all these elements that are part of smart sales, and it all aligns with what's happening. The asynchronous life we talk about, being able to interact and buy things online. It's all asynchronous, right? You're having these bots and all that interface with you. And I heard a podcast the other day where the speaker mentioned that right now, AI is like an amoeba in its complexity. Just an amoeba, a single-celled amoeba flopping around in some bog water, right? If you can imagine in the next 10 years, that amoeba will turn into a roach. As disgusting as they are, they're complicated little animals and they have their own biology to them. And in 50 more years, they're going to be like a monkey. And if, everybody freaks out about that idea of having, AI be humanistic, right? But it's on the horizon, and you need to really understand how to use it in your business if you want to capitalize on the success that it can provide you.
Yeah. Okay, let's take a minute now and go talk about AI. We've told historically, talked about how Microsoft was quick to jump in with its investment in OpenAI, which controls ChatGPT, and how they almost sneaked it away from ChatGPT, away from OpenAI when there was a sort of a mutiny that happened in the management ranks 3 or 4 months ago. But what we know behind that is even more interesting. Intel had previously had an opportunity at that OpenAI investment. They had turned it down. We also know now that Intel had multiple opportunities to hook up with companies out there in order to make chips for them for their foundry business, but they always kept finding that it wasn't going to be profitable enough, so they didn't get into them and they let those businesses get away from them. And now they're really flailing. So that's the dark side we've talked about that's happened with Intel in the artificial intelligence business. But the reality is that the game is getting pretty big. Now there are the idea is you build a model and then you have people use the model. Like we use ChatGPT, well, we're using a model. Building any model costs tens of millions of dollars. So that's become a big time game. So now we say, okay, us entrepreneurs out there, we're not going to build a model. We're going to be users of the model. And that's cool. I mean, none of us built Microsoft type applications, right? We didn't build Word and Excel, but we use those products to make ourselves very successful. In case of what we see happening now with the big players in this, I want to loop that up before we turn to the small companies. But I'd say that Amazon, I remember I told you that Microsoft had 28 consecutive quarters of revenue growth. Apple has only had revenue growth in 2 of the last 7 quarters. They've had negative revenue growth. In other words, less revenues declined in 5 of the last 7 quarters. We do know that 2023 indicated a growth stall for Apple. And so that is something that should be very concerning to people. The reality is that they just launched the iPhone 16, and the stock didn't really shoot up. And the reason is that they said, okay, the iPhone 16 is going to have a lot of artificial intelligence capability. But if you look at it, you say, well, what are you giving me today? Not much. There's some improvements in the photography and some things you can do around photography. That's about it. So what Apple's banking on is they're going to get something to happen in AI. They're going to come up with applications, and then this huge user base of iPhones and iPads and Macs will come out, and then we'll use it. Now, the thing is, they better get with it, and they better get with it fast, because people are going to go quickly to these new applications. So it's kind of discouraging when you see that their revenues, they're in a growth stall. They've got to make AI work. They've got to. But they're nowhere near as strong as where Microsoft is today. Microsoft's much, much stronger. And in fact, the thing's also possibly true that Microsoft's so strong it could catch Google. Because Google, 88% of profits come from, almost all the revenues, 88% of profits, all this stuff comes from Google search. If they lose the search business because they don't get on top of AI-assisted search, then they're going to be in trouble as well. So we see a couple of big-time guys here that are taking risks. But who's not taking the risk is Microsoft. Microsoft's out there, as we said, they're making the investments now all the way from how do I apply this to the cloud? How do I apply this to search? How am I going to apply it to Office 365? Then how do I get my data centers all set up? Then how do I connect the data centers with the fiber optic cable? And then how do I make the electricity to power the data centers, right? They're really thinking that through. And as a result, they're emerging as the most powerful company, which a decade ago, I would never have thought it would happen. But the brilliance of the leadership team at Microsoft has been to de-invest in Windows and Office, the traditional products, get everybody onto the cloud, put your money into cloud software as a service, and then AI. And that's where they're headed today. And I would guess it to be an unstoppable locomotive right now. If you're looking around and saying, hey, Adam, I got $1,000 that I'd like to invest I think Microsoft might be one place you should strongly consider, just based upon the statistics that I put out today. There's some people that say, well, wait a minute, Intel's not going to go out of business. I'm sure they won't go out of business. Well, just keep in mind that when you fall behind, you rarely catch up. And I don't think Intel's going out of business either, but I don't want the third player. Who's the third player in e-commerce? Walmart. I mean, nobody.
Maybe Walmart.
You want to be, you want to be with the leader in these things. You want to be with the people that are growing and growing fast and applying it. And today, that's Microsoft. And now to our listener base, not only can they learn this lesson from Microsoft, but do it. That means get out there and look for these AI applications. Where can I do things that I could use artificial intelligence so that I could be more productive? And who am I training in my organization to use artificial intelligence? I mean, if you've used ChatGPT, remember in the old days when we first started doing searches, we'd say, hey, Jane is a really good Googler, meaning that that person was very good at thinking up the right keywords to get a search done very, very quickly. The same thing is happening in ChatGPT today. When I encourage people to go back to the podcast we did about what are the primary skills needed for artificial intelligence, we outlined 7 skills, and most of them weren't technical. We didn't get into the technology side of it, but more how to use the tools. Now, how would you be good at using Excel, Word, PowerPoint, and now it's how would you be good at using the current tools and the emerging tools in artificial intelligence.
So I have an 18-year-old son who's just entering the University of Arizona as a freshman in optical engineering. And, he's still going to learn all the basics, and there's still a huge need for that, the math, the physics, and all that. But there's some of the elements of AI and using that are folded in, and they need to be folded in. And I also told a story a few months back about my 16-year-old that was doing English homework, and he had his phone on the side, and I caught him using ChatGPT, and I asked him if it was possible, and he said, well, if it was permissible by the teacher, and he said, well, not really. And that moment was interesting for me because I understand why they don't allow that, but at the same time, it's a tool. You can imagine a math teacher back in when the calculators were becoming battery powered, you could take them with you into class. There was probably the same sort of irreverence towards the new technology. The devil's work was coming into the classroom. And so here we are again with another one. I mean, the internet boom happened 25, 30 years ago. And here we are again with another boom that's about to burst. We're at the amoeba stage. We haven't even hit arachnid here. And, you better be part of that growth. You better look at your business and look at all the different pieces of your business. There's consultants out there that help you to identify what part of your business can be moved over to AI. And I suggest that everybody look into doing that.
Yeah, it was about 30 years ago when the internet was emerging, and I was out there, proselytizing how great it was going to be, and I would run into so many naysayers. And at that time, I actually bought a computer for myself. I bought one for my wife, and I bought one for all 3 of my children who were just at the time in elementary school. Then I put a satellite dish on the side of my house. It wasn't really a satellite dish. It was a big dish on my house. I bounced a signal 45 miles from my house to the Sears Tower so that I could get high-speed bandwidth, because in those days it wasn't available through the phone company. It was how you had to do it. You had dial-up service, and that was terrible. And then I ran Category 1 wiring or Category 3 wiring through my house so that every bedroom and usable room in the house could plug in to the high-speed internet. And people just thought I was an idiot. They'd come visit me and they thought I was crazy. But the reality was, my family was very internet aware, used the internet, saw the advantages of it. Whenever teachers would give homework, they started sending notes home to me as a parent saying, you got to quit letting your children use the internet for doing research for their history reports, et cetera. This is as we moved into middle school. They were trying to say, you can't let them use the internet. And I would be, you got to be kidding me. We live in Chicago, one of the biggest metropolitan areas in the country. And as a school teacher, you're trying to tell me they're not supposed to use the most modern tools. So anyway, they grew up very used to doing those things, and your children are doing the same. And I think our business leaders out there need to look around at what the children, the young people, what folks are doing. And, if they're using a tool, clearly they're getting a benefit out of it. If you're not using the tool, the question is it just because you don't want to try? Is that really what's holding you back? Because I'll bet it is. You just don't know what it is, and so you don't want to try. And I was just looking at a project recently with Mary Lou, where somebody wanted they had a large basket of automated responses that they use. They created these over time. And the idea was that these all needed to be updated. And I said, why wouldn't we just take all of them and feed them into Chat GPT and tell them, here's this, and then maybe a few keywords that went with each one, and the direction we wanted to update it. Because I said, we'll have all that whole project done as almost as fast as we can load it in. So I'm saying we'll have it done in a day. If we try to rewrite 130 of these things, it's going to take several days to weeks. And I don't think that would be a benefit. We'll have this whole thing done in less than a week. We just feed into Chat GPT and then look over the results, make sure we don't have any hallucinations, make sure that everything's the direction we want. We'll have the whole thing done in a week. This is something that in the old days, we would have thought of it as a 2-month, 3-month project, probably would have charged the client tens of thousands of dollars to try to get it done. Now we're talking about something we could turn around in 4 to 5 days. It's going to be less than 10 grand. But the problem I'm probably going to have is I think the client's going to figure it out and do it on their own. I think they're going to realize they don't even need to buy the service because they could just do it internally. And that's the risk we run. But it only happens if we stay ahead of the game. And our people out there, I think all of our listeners, you need to understand that you got to be like Microsoft. Just because you put money into the core business historically does not mean that's where you're going to make money going forward. And you need to be very, very thoughtful about where you're doing your training, where you're hiring your people, and the processes you're used to provide your solutions.
Yeah, very well said, Adam. There's a lot to really learn in this podcast. And, go back historically, look at our other podcasts, look at the conversations we've had. We've been right in step with where things are going. And, I have lots of listeners and our audience talk about, hey, I listened to your podcast from 9 months ago, and there's still value in it. So go back to our history. Of course, we're on all the different platforms and on sparkpartners.com. And then Adam and I, of course, are always available for a consultation to see how we can help. Sometimes that perspective from the outside will give you some really major ideas on what you need to do on the inside. So with that, Adam, we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks a lot, Manny.